Welcome back to TERF Talk Down Under. I'm Stassja and this is Ange.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Stassja.
Hi. Well, it's been a busy week in news here in Australia. So I think it was last Saturday, front page of the Sydney Morning Herald. I don't know if it was in the print edition of The Age. I didn't hear about that, but it was certainly on the Age website as well. This big article about a number of, I think, midwifery doctors and professors they're putting together a paper that's going to be published quite soon regarding the erasure of women from language and how it impacts healthcare.
And it does.
And it's gotten a huge response, that.
Mm-hmm.
It absolutely does. Look, one thing that was really disappointing in that article was, what's her name? Tanya something. She's the CEO or something of Gender Equity Victoria.
Okay.
And she said in that article, look, I don't have time. We don't have time for TERF feminism, blah, 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 blah. Right? So insulting.
It is.
So I emailed her, the head of Gender Equity Victoria, and I encouraged other women to do the same, and we all got this standard response back, and it was just garbage. We're trans inclusive. We don't see any problem, no conflict between women's rights and trans inclusion.
Racists don't see anything wrong with their beliefs either.
True. And I ended up responding to their response, and it just included all these links. Okay, here's Whisper, here's Leah Thomas's teammates saying it's really uncomfortable when he gets his dick out in the women's change rooms.
Yep.
Look, a bunch of other links, including a link to this sissy website where they have a gallery of autogynephiles doing their thing. And I just asked them, would you be comfortable undressing in front of these men? Would you be comfortable talking about your sexual assault in front of these men? This is the position that they're putting women in. And Gender Equity Victoria, apparently they used to be called something like the Victorian Women's Health Network.
Oh, really? They had something to do with women. You wouldn't think so, would you?
Yeah. And I noticed at the bottom of their website pages, there's a Victorian government logo. So I don't know how they're funded, if they're completely 100% funded by Vic government or something. But also a pride flag. So the old school rainbow flag before it got the massive intrusion from the trans section.
They're just not listening to women. They're not listening at all.
Yeah, and I said that in a comment somewhere. It's luxury feminism, luxury beliefs, elitist feminism. That's what women are practicing. Yeah.
And what gets me, it's because the government sends out these guidelines and everyone's funding's dependent on the government. It's the Victorian state government that is sending this tribe out, all this ACON, diversity and inclusion stuff that demands that organisations who receive government funding do these things and gives little rewards to them for doing things that are pro-trans and whatever. But it's all about the queer, the trans, and all of the paraphilias. And it's not about the lesbians and, gays and bisexuals. They've just been ignored. And there's no acknowledgement that, sexual orientation and all these other paraphilias are in direct contrast with each other. There's absolutely no acknowledgement from these people. They're just pretending it's not true.
Absolutely. Look, from that article, a woman, Julie, I think it's pronounced Szego, or something, She wrote sort of a response, and but she also, it was about pride jumpers and stuff as well. She was talking about what I mentioned last week about the AFL doing that, AFLW doing the pride round. But the AFL men's division, they don't have a pride round. They don't have any. They have never had an AFL player come out gay, ever.
No, they don't come out, but we know there's a few of them in there, and there's a few rumors circulating as well. But yeah, no, I can't believe all the years that there's been an AFL, there's not one gay player.
Yeah, right. But she included this line which summed up very well what I was trying to say last week. The line was regarding this AFL Pride round. Both cases reveal that, like housework, the task of social change falls disproportionately on women. Right?
Yeah.
100%. And I remember a Magdalene Burns video where she was responding to some faux feminists video. In this faux feminist video, she's like sat down and this is what feminism is about. It's about, and she's just listed every single social justice thing that you can think of. It's about supporting people of colour. It's about helping disabled people get rights and just everything you can think of. And Magdalene Burns it was a brilliant response. She's just like, oh yeah, and how are we going to do that? Like, with what money? What money do we have to help every single fucking social justice movement on the planet? Are you serious?
When women are already like behind in everything, we're expected to help everybody else.
Yeah. So yeah, Julie responded to that, and interestingly, there was a Muslim woman in the AFLW who decided to sit out the pride on religious beliefs. And Julie, in her article at the end, sort of said it's these religions are a front for homophobia. And I just think, I didn't follow, what's his name, that rugby player up in New South Wales, Flo or something?
Yeah.
What did he say that got it? Did he say?
Well, he's a Christian fundamentalist, and he did say a bunch of homophobic stuff, like very homophobic things. Not all Christians are obviously homophobes. So the conflation of Christianity with homophobia is again abused by trans activists to demonize all Christians or people who have Christian beliefs. But so, there are a bunch of Christian homophobes out there, but there are a bunch of atheist homophobes too, so I think in a lot of cases that the trans activists are jumping on the bandwagon to demonize all Christian beliefs as transphobic.
Yeah. Well, speaking of homophobic Christians.
I know. I'm dreading talking about this because this just fed into the other side's, craziness. And I was just like, oh no.
It was so bad. Christian school in Queensland came out with this contract that stated essentially it lumped in all the immoral sexuality stuff, which included homosexuality, pedophilia, incest, but it also included fornication, which Kat Kariner pointed out, well, doesn't that just mean heterosexual sex? So,
and all the heterosexuals aren't picketing and boycotting and carrying on, are they?
But look, I don't know what they were getting at, aside from, because the other section that they had in that contract that all the students, I think all the parents were meant to sign, was that the students must dress in accordance with their biological sex.
And they also, they had to sign that their child would not change genders while attending the school. And I see the merit of that, that agreement. I feel the way that they went about it was completely wrong, and they're going about it for all the wrong reasons. And of course, you know, I think it was 65,000 people signed a petition to, you know, get that school's funding cancelled, and to cancel the principal and cancel the teachers and cancel everyone who keeps their kids at the school, on the grounds mainly of trans activism. And everyone that I saw interviewed about it was trans identifying. You know, there was no real discussion about the impacts of schools on children turning up and saying, you know, I'm the opposite sex. There's nothing to do with that. It was all about, you know, freedom to be who we are, and kids have the right to, you know, be who they really are, no matter what. Yeah, and all, of course, you know, they didn't address all the other homophobia and stuff like that. It was all about the trans stuff. So again, and yeah, and it just fed into the hysteria out there that transphobia and homophobia are the same thing, and they're not. We know they're not.
Absolutely.
And, you know, I feel like we're fighting an uphill battle, trying to convince society that they're not. And it's unfortunately fallen to lesbians and some gay men to stand up and say, hey, you know, men can't be lesbians. You know, like, yeah, you know, so it's sort of like, you know, we make tiny little steps forward, and then something like this comes and wipes us out. But the media is complicit in this. They're not. There's, you know, they'll you know, have massive amounts of articles about this homophobia and this horrible Christian school that's making all these demands of parents and kids, but then they won't, you know, publish anything more nuanced, or they won't publish about, you know, where certain funding's coming from. They won't publish about, you know, the dangers of puberty blockers, or the fact that there's proof that trans in teenage kids of high school age is a social contagion. They won't publish any of that stuff. So the media is complicit in silencing us and conflating us with all these horrible militant Christians who are just, you know, people that nobody in their right mind would be associated with, or with their views. You know, our views are not their views.
Yeah, that's
at
it.
all.
That's it. I'm. It just shits me that our views and the views of the Christian right are conflated as one and the same thing, and it's not that at all. It's very different. Like, our fight is about protecting gay and lesbian kids from unnecessary transition. Protecting gay and lesbian only spaces from the intrusion of essentially autogynephiles. But, you know, also women that think they're gay men.
And the Christians come from a place of homophobia and ignorance.
Yeah. And
we come from a place where we are informed. And we are certainly not homophobic, you know, by and large. I don't think anyone who is a blatant homophobe lasts very long in gender critical circles.
That's right.
They certainly don't last in radfem circles, but, you know, anywhere in you know, on our side of the street, I don't think people like that last at all. They've got nothing else in common with us. They don't want to have anything to do with us. And, you know, and it's funny because I used to be quite involved in the left in activism, and, you know, I've been criticised for hanging with the far right, but there is absolutely no evidence that I've done so. And if there has been organisations that are gender critical that are aligned with the right, I refuse to have anything to do with them. I'm not going to align with racists. And this is part of the problem, because we have integrity and we won't align ourselves with, you know, some of these louder voices, and the Christian groups have got a lot more funding. Not all, I mean, I'm not saying all Christian groups, sorry, but, you know, these, you know, sort of militant Christian groups, we're still being silenced because we won't align ourselves with them. You know, we're struggling to be heard because we have integrity.
Yeah. It's like binary Australia, you know, that group?
Yes.
They do a lot of good work on this issue. They do. But we know that their origins were that they were an organisation that was opposed to same-sex marriage.
Yes.
And I've watched a video by Kira Lee, who is the founder and I guess CEO or whatever of Binary Australia, where she talked about her reasons for opposing same-sex marriage. And she tried to make out that, in her mind, her opposition to it was that there are even a lot of gay and lesbian people that opposed same-sex marriage on the grounds that it's like this gender conformity. Mm-hmm. And I know there are lesbians who are marriage abolitionists.
Yeah, I am.
There you go.
I'm a marriage abolitionist. I don't want to get married. I never have, never will. Yeah. I respect everybody's right to do that if that's what they desire, because that's the social norm. And if they want to get married, I respect their right to do that.
Yeah. But I remember posting in our private group for gender critical Australians in New Zealand as something from Binary, and a gay man jumped into the comments and was just like, I'll never work with that organisation. And it's a real shame because they're doing a lot of fundraising and they seem to have a good graphic designer or something that does their memes.
They look very professional, don't they?
Yeah.
But so do a lot of, look at all the trans stuff. They all look very professional too, and they've got lots of money. And look at what they're peddling.
Yeah, that's right.
So, no, I won't align with Binary. There's a big long list, and I know people that will jump in bed with the right. And, I'm open for debate on using pronouns. I'm open for debate on a lot of stuff, but I will not align with overt racists. I just won't do it.
I just thought of also LGBT Alliance UK, in their like code of conduct or something, whatever they call it, their terms, they have something around they won't work with any group that opposes abortion. And I thought that's good. That's sticking to principles. All right, well, look, our guest has arrived. So
fabulous.
I'll let her in. Our guest today is Sandra Pertot. She's a psychologist here in Australia who has faced some disciplinary issues for her.
There she is.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
How you going?
I'm quite well. Sorry about scaring you earlier today about the time. I was about to check, so I would have got it right eventually.
Excellent. Welcome, Sandra. Maybe if you could tell us in your own words the story of what happened to you when you spoke up about gender affirmation model of care.
Yes, it still sometimes has the power to make me feel quite unsettled. I'll give you my background. I did my postgraduate clinical training in the early 70s, and the course that I did was the very first course in Australia to offer any sort of training in human sexuality. So it was mainly Masters and Johnson-based stuff, but it took in working with gay people for gay rights and so on. And transgender cases were very, very rare. So over the years since the 70s, I'd focused primarily on sexuality and couples work and so on. And I did work with some gay people who eventually found their feet, and mostly the issues I saw then were gay relationships. Across those decades, there had been some people presenting who were almost always adult males who had transitioned in adulthood. And these people seem to me to be it's hard not to find a word that sounds patronising, but they just seem very real, So I had no problem working with these adult trans women. there was one case that happened in the 90s of a couple that came for counselling. He had been transitioning to female. He'd been on cross-sex hormones. He was on the path to surgical reassignment when he met a woman and decided he was actually male. So that always stayed in my mind as a bit of a case lesson. So then I semi-retired and came up north. I live near Taree and I'm in a practice there. So again, you know, I have a general practice of depression, anxiety and so on, but I saw a lot of couples work. And then I started seeing more of the transgender presentations. Some of them were older, like a woman who had always felt she was male and now felt at this age, you know, late 60s, she was in a position to then transition to male. And conversely, I saw a male who's in his 70s, who's finally achieving his goal of, as we speak, in fact, of undergoing sexual reassignment. So I've always had this very easy view with working with trans people. And I don't know why some people are trans, but I know some of them are, and for whatever reason, for some of them, they really benefit by transition. So then I started seeing more young people presenting, and the typical scenario of more young females, adolescent females, starting to say that, you know, they thought they were trans. And when I started doing some assessment, it was a very recent history. There was no previous indication that they were trans, but they tended to be, in the people I've seen, socially isolated with poor social skills and online a lot. So I started to feel uneasy about these presentations. So I talked to a couple of people who work in the area, particularly in Newcastle, saying, look, I'm a bit concerned about these kids, you know, what's going on. And what I got was, no, look, they're okay, because I was asked to write a supporting letter. They're okay. You know, we know that if they say they're trans, they are trans. So, you know, with that background, it still didn't sit well with me. So I was at a conference on sexuality and I actually started talking to some people at breakfast saying, look, I've got these young people, and I made the mistake of saying I thought they were looking for attention, which blew the whole thing up, of course. But what I was trying to say was I felt they were looking for an identity. So here was I, this, you know, semi-retired psychologist in private practice in a country town. And it wasn't until I came across Lisa Littman's work that I suddenly realised I wasn't alone. And so from then on, I wrote a letter to Insight, which is the magazine for the APS. Before I did that letter, this is how naive I've been. So this goes back to probably 18 months ago. I looked at the APS website and found that there were quite a few articles on gender dysphoria. They were all written by the same person. They all advocated for affirmation, and they basically that was the only thing that was going to be allowed. And this person had also written an article which appeared in one of the newspapers, which basically said there's no such thing as social contagion. So he and I had quite an intense email conversation, which got more and more kind of, I don't know, wasn't more and more disjointed, I suppose, because he simply would not shift from the view that some of these young people may have been socially influenced and it may not be the right diagnosis for them. So we ended up, he was saying things like, you know, trans people shouldn't have to prove they're trans. There shouldn't be any gatekeepers. And so I ended up by saying, well, you're a gatekeeper. You just leave the gate open for everybody. So it didn't end well. And so after that was when I wrote the letter to Insight. And what surprised me, it came out, I think, November, December the year before last. One of the things that concerned me was the number of psychologists who contacted me with their same worries but unable to speak out. Some of them had lost their jobs and so on, the same old story. But that was kind of as far as I was going with it. I just felt more confident about what I was doing. Then the chair of the College of Clinical Psychologists asked me to do a podcast. And initially I thought that it was going to be more about the work that I do with couples with mismatched libidos, because that's my main area of interest. But she already knew, of course, that I was concerned about the trans stuff. So then she started asking me about it. And, I just felt all this passion about what was going on. The problem was that up to that point, I hadn't really got involved with trans ideology. My only perspective was a psychologist sitting in her own room trying to figure out what the hell's going on. So when I did the podcast, I made these errors, such as I interchanged sex with gender. I talked about the need for an assessment. I talked about how do we find out whether someone's genuinely trans or not, which is like waving a red flag to a bull. So basically, when that was published, a few weeks later, it was published in March, and a few weeks later, I received this complaint. The APS received this complaint, which was by a group called Gender Galaxy, and they had this whole list of things that I'd done wrong. And there were a couple of things that I mentioned the name of somebody who'd given me some advice one-to-one, and she got upset about that, which, that was probably the only thing I really regret, naming that person who'd given me some advice. So it became, one of those incredibly stressful periods where, for me, what the complaint was alleging was that I was unethical, I was, not a good practitioner, and they had a list of complaints, a list of requirements. One was that the podcast gets taken down. The other one was that they wanted the opportunity to talk to the board. They wanted to educate the APS on what was right. So this went on for about 5 weeks. And I was pretty much alone. I didn't have anybody I spoke to basically didn't want to know about it. And even my solicitor, when I rang her, she gave me some good advice, but she never got back to me. My family was supportive, and I work in a lovely practice where I knew that they would be supportive, but for the first 2 weeks, I couldn't tell them because I knew I had to be so focused. And in those couple of weeks before I put my submission in, I just 24 hours a day lived this thing. I was quite lucky that I only worked part-time. My caseload at that stage dropped, which was good. And I just got totally absorbed in doing this thing. And I sent it to, I sent a copy of the response, obviously, to the APS president and the APS CEO. And I began to feel a bit more confident because the APS president got back to me and said, "Oh, wow, I've learned a lot." So that gave me some confidence, but there was so much else going on that it wasn't until I'd asked for a few things as well. I didn't care whether the podcast went up or not, but I wanted, the APS to make some statements about the need for an assessment. In the end, I think the APS handled it very well. What they did was they said, we accept that with any health policy, there will be diverse views. So, and the only thing that they asked me to do was to redo some of the introduction. And I also took a few other pieces out that I thought it's a bit silly. And they gave the gender group nothing. So that was kind of how I became, not liberated, given energy to actually pursue this in more detail. Because in doing the research for the response, I learned all this stuff that I didn't know. I didn't know all this stuff was going on worldwide. I hadn't heard about it. So gradually I got in touch with a couple of overseas groups and have become much more concerned. But my focus still remains on, we know that some people are presenting with symptoms of being transgender, symptoms of gender dysphoria, for whom that diagnosis is not safe. Yeah. And that's been my concern all along. But you try and talk to any trans, positive person about the gender affirming approach, which I've tried to do on a few Facebook pages in the Psych Society. There's just a meltdown. No one can tell me whether I'm trans. People are dying every day because of people like you. So it's just been, it just floors me, the lack of logic, the lack of. So then I decided after all this that because I am a writer and I've written books on sexuality, that I wanted to get something into the Sydney Morning Herald. It took it took a lot of months of very gentle contact, because the Sydney Morning Herald had been the victim of a complaint to the Press Council about something they'd published earlier. But once the editor, the opinions editor, came on board, she was amazing. She worked, day and night pretty much to get it just right. And so even though the ideas were mine, she shaped some of them. And I still say to her, like, you deserve half the credit here, because it was written in a way that was going to be received by the paper.
Okay.
So
we might have to get you to put us in touch with that editor.
She won't appreciate that. We need to be very careful about how we manage that, because and I am trying to be very careful, because the newspaper can't afford to be seen to be too biased. And I think they're taking some very brave steps. And so, I don't want them to be overwhelmed by that. But so that's where I'm up to. And now what happened was, the next thing that happened was I saw a draft. I was sent a draft, because I'm a member of the interest group, on proposed new guidelines for working with people presenting with gender dysphoria. This was in August. And I was quite open with the group. I let them know that I couldn't support those guidelines, and I would be talking to, or letting the APS know of my concerns, and that they should get legal advice before they go ahead with accepting those guidelines. And so that's how the task force came about. Now, I don't feel I can go on the task force. But I think that's probably a good thing anyway, because I think I would be a distraction. The focus of, all your transphobic thoughts are, distilled in me. So I think there's a lot of good people going to go on the task force, and I think the APS will be very balanced. I don't think they can afford to say the gender affirming policy is wrong, because it's right in some cases. This is the issue. But I think my guess would be that we'll end up with something like the psychiatrist's statement, which means that protects psychologists from not doing immediate affirming and doing some exploratory therapy. So this time last year, I was this naive little psychologist who had no idea that this was all going to blow up and create such havoc. And it was very distressing. I mean, one of my friends said that she'd never seen me in such a state, because it attacked my integrity. It attacked who I am. And, that was the thing that just, there's take no prisoners from the trans people. So that's up to date. That's what I'm up to. And,
Well done. It sounds like you got a crash course in gender critical ideas as a result of all this. And it's happened to so many women. We had a woman on the show, Kaz, who played roller derby. And she saw an article about a male competing in a women's sport, and she made a comment on this post, and bang, same thing that happened to you. She just got attacked, and she said it was so stressful for the first month or something. She couldn't believe it was happening. She got kicked out of roller derby for having the wrong views. I think it's just these trans activists, they are actively turning people gender critical.
Well, this is the paradox. If they had never put that complaint in, I would have just kept going with what I thought was right and focused mainly. I'm trying to write a textbook for working with couples with sexual difficulties, and I'd started that. Well, I haven't done that now for years. So if they had not put in the complaint, I would not have reacted, and the APS would still be going along, because when you think about, the executive of any health society, they can't be across every issue. And so they get people who say that they're the experts saying this is the latest thing, this is the latest. So they have to accept them, because they are not, the executive are not across at all. So I think that's how they've managed to capture so many organisations, that, it's only when you really get down to it that you start to think, whoa, there's a lot more here than I thought. And what was interesting was I'm still supportive of I've still got some trans clients, but I ended up having a dialogue with a solicitor who was asking me about doing an assessment for someone, and at that point I just didn't feel like doing it. I didn't feel able to, and she started talking to me about some of the broader issues. And initially I was quite resistant. I was saying, no, that's not what trans people are like. They just want to live in their own lives, and then I got more and more into it, and I thought, oh, bloody hell. I don't know. So the irony of it is, if they had not made the complaint, the APS would probably still just be going along.
Wow.
Well, Sandra, I've followed your entire story, and I remember you just going, what's happening to me? But you defending yourself and standing your ground has been so important, because I've lost count of the psychologists that I have spoken to personally through my work, and also I'm studying counselling, but, you know, that have said to me, I don't believe in the affirmation model, and I'm afraid of losing my job if I tell someone, no, I don't think you're transgender. Like, I've lost count.
Yep.
And these aren't just, you know, fresh out of uni. Like, these are psychologists with 20, 30 plus years of experience who are revered in their career, who are scared to tell the truth.
Yes, that's it. And they were the people contacting me saying, look, thank you for what you're doing, but I can't put my head up above the parapet.
That's what they said to me, yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, I was born in 1950, so you can work out how old I am. And I went through the early feminist years. So I think I was just born stroppy. So standing up for women's rights, I mean, one of the things I still go over this, and I'm happily married 50 years next year, so it's not an anti-male thing, was that when we went overseas in the 70s, my husband had to sign my passport application.
Yeah.
And that has still stuck in my throat. So I've always stood up for people's rights. And this was just another issue. The other thing, though, is because of my age, I knew that I had much less to lose. Yeah. So it was a very considered, what's the worst thing they can do to me? Well, they can go after my registration. That would be, distressing, but I'm at the end of my career. And so that was a very conscious thing, that it needed to be someone who didn't lose as much.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah. So what are the current Australian Psychological Society, that's the APS, what are their current guidelines on this?
Well, it's very much the affirming model. But, one of the things that I've discovered in my research is that all the written stuff like WPATH SOC7, DSM-5 diagnosis of gender dysphoria, and even the new SOC8 draft, Standards of Care draft, all say that there should be an assessment done to make sure the symptoms aren't better accounted for by another diagnosis. I have not found anywhere anything official that says this is the official policy. But unfortunately, in talking to the solicitors, what they're saying is if your peer group accepts that this is best practice, that is your defence. And that's why they're having trouble getting some of the legal cases up. My view would be, well, hang on a minute. I was in the middle of nowhere and I worked it out. Why the hell can't the rest of you? So I don't know. I think the APS are going to be very, very careful, and I think that's wise. But at the moment, definitely the gender affirming policy is the accepted policy.
Because all their recommendations are coming out of places like the Royal Children's Hospital that are completely captured. Yeah, and even though people from within those organisations, like some doctors at Westmead, which is also, where they perform trans surgery on children, they've come out and said, no, we think there should be more exploration. Nobody's listening to them. They're listening to, people like the head down, what's her name, Telfer down in Melbourne, who just says, no, children can have puberty blockers. They have no effect. And, it's coming there. But where are they getting their information from?
Yes, that's right. And that's really what...
Trans organisations. Yeah.
What I'm wanting the APS to do is to make sure that, every piece of research that's used in forming a new guideline is reliable research.
Yes.
But, the Westmead group, they did that really great study, but the group that did it got hammered.
They did.
They're not prepared to even talk about it publicly because they just got hammered. And that, it just does my head in. I don't know.
The research is all, come straight, like the research comes all straight from trans organisations, either, here or overseas. Even for self-identification here in Victoria, it was all from trans groups. There was no consultation with any independent psychological assessors or any independent women's groups or any of the other people who have a vested interest in this. It all came from trans people themselves. I mean, that's not research. That is not research.
No, and the whole idea of self-ID, just doesn't make sense. I know that in the discussion by email that I had with this other person, it was very much based on I shouldn't have to prove I'm trans. And then in the dialogue I got involved in on a Facebook, an APS Facebook page, the same thing. So it's very much about I shouldn't have to prove that I'm trans, therefore I should be just affirmed. And it's so naive. You know, it was only after the complaint that I then went on YouTube. I'm not very media savvy. It took me a while to figure out how to do it all. I'm on Twitter now, which is another nightmare. My God, I won't stay on it much longer because it's a nightmare. But, so I went on YouTube and just searched for detransitioners, and there's some very grounded young people there talking about what their experiences were. Yeah. And yet when you feed that back to the gender affirming mob, they're very rare. And they're not addressing the logical problem. Think logically here, people. You're saying everybody who says they're trans is trans. Here we have people who said that and they're not trans, and they just don't account for it.
And the comorbidities too, like autism. You know, I've had autism specialists express concern to me. Yes. You know, that autistic kids are far more vulnerable to this than any other. Looking for that place, like you said, looking for that identity.
Yes, or looking for something that's explained. Yeah. I think there's actually more of a shift now because I still work in the country, so we have the EAP for some of the school teachers and so on. So I see some people working in schools, and I think increasingly over the last 6 months, it's gone away from troubled kids to kids who want to be cool.
Yeah.
So I think these kids are going to present with no significant mental health problems, but it's just cool. And I think that's the group that we're not identifying. This person I was talking to that works in one of the high schools, that's what she was saying. Like, it's odd, you know, they're good mates and they all suddenly decide and I don't even know some of the terms, like one's demisexual and one's pansexual and one's I don't even know what half these mean. And I've been working.
My 13-year-old says that all the girls are identifying as either non-binary and then bisexual. And I'm like, what 13-year-old girls know enough about sexuality or know enough about sex and gender to even identify it as that? Yeah. It just doesn't make sense. But she, in her defense, and it's not because of anything I say, because my children think I am very uncool. Yes. They think the gender stuff's not very cool because everyone's doing it.
There you go.
I'm hoping that that's going to be partly why the kids are going to start turning away from it. Yeah. It's like the emo stuff from a few, years ago. And so
I was both a feminist and a goth. So you've touched on a few things that are relevant to me. Yes. But but they weren't permanent.
No, that's right. That's the issue. And people try and equate it to gay rights. Now, I think a lot of the people that I've been just chatting with, who are your average person in the community, they see supporting trans rights in the same way that they thought gay rights should be supported. And that was a really hard battle in the 70s and 80s. When I did my Masters of Clinical Psychology in the 70s, there was a psychiatrist whose name I've deliberately repressed, who was doing aversion therapy with gay people, attaching them to electric shocks, not on the penis, but on the hands. And every time they showed any arousal, they'd get a shock. And then, of course, one of the things that they noticed, which eventually stopped it, was the suicide rate amongst that cohort were going up because they'd leave therapy, they'd be distressed. What would they do for comfort? So then they'd go to a partner or a friend, and then that reinforced it. So it was just a nightmare. So it hasn't, but apart from that, the main issue was really sitting with with sexuality questioning kids. There was nothing to lose either way. And so you could sort of say, look, I'm not really sure what's going on here. Let's have a look at a few things. And, some of the young people who thought they were gay were afraid to be gay. So they might say things like, well, when I went into the toilets, I looked at his dick. That must mean I'm gay. You got these people who are very unaware. And then you had the other group, which just broke your heart, who were gay but didn't want to be, whose parents, one lot of parents came in and said, maybe he's just a little bit gay. And I said, probably not. But that was so different because it didn't matter what pathway they took to get to the place that was right for them. But with this cohort, yes, it's if they go on puberty blockers, if they go on chest binders, all of those things can have long-term consequences. And I honestly don't know how we tackle the worldwide capture of this. There's great people like Jennifer Bilek who's looking at the finances behind it, and it's got to be about the money.
Yes.
One of the bits of research that I did in the middle of all this chaos after the complaint was I started looking at how did they come to this decision in DSM-5, because prior to that there'd been the diagnosis of transgender. It wasn't called that; it was called something else.
Identity disorder, I think.
Sorry? Yeah.
Disorder.
Yeah. So apparently, prior to the task force being formed in sometime around 2005, I think it started to get put together. The trans community was already saying we don't have a disorder, but the problem was to get access to the treatment, they needed a diagnosis. And so that's how it came about that gender dysphoria was the diagnosis and not gender identity disorder. And when you look at the funding of who funded a lot of the DSM, not just for gender, but other things, there's pharmaceutical companies funding it, corporations that have got a vested interest. And it's not just in this area. If you look at the growth of antidepressant medication from the early 90s, a lot of it's grown because of seminars and all that type of thing, conferences that the drug companies put on. But how do we, realistically, I think we are turning a corner. I think in the last 12 months, like going on Twitter, oh, bloody hell. Going on Twitter, I sit there and apparently a lot of the things that people are saying now, 12 months ago, they would have been booted off. But now there's these little groups that are saying, a lot of the anti-gender affirming stuff, and they're basically getting a lot of flack from the trans radical activists, but they're still on the show, on the product. So I think there's a change, but I don't know. Nothing will really change until we get a solid case going through the courts.
Yes.
And I
hope it's not us. Yeah.
Sandra, if you can say, what do you think should happen with children with gender dysphoria? What do you think is the best approach? Because, look, I'll tell you, I've reached a point where I just do not think that puberty blockers should be given ever.
Yeah.
Kids grow out of it, and we don't know. There is no way of determining which is which. What do you think?
Well, I've always worked with adolescents. I've never been, I very briefly worked with children some years ago for 1 year when I was working for CAMS, and it's not my area of expertise. And so I was kind of holding the place, and then I moved on. So I never worked with young people. The youngest I had seen was about 13 or 14. So they're all sort of going through puberty or post-puberty. And again, I didn't know much about it. But now I've become so conservative, I don't think anybody should have any hormone therapy until they're in their 20s. There should be no surgery until they're in their 20s.
Right.
I've got a young trans male who I saw him, and I'm happy to call him his preferred pronoun because I feel, okay about that. He was just so solid, and I think I first saw him at 16. He didn't do anything until he spent 2 years researching all the data on hormone therapy. When he finally decided to go on cross-sex hormones, it was already over the age of consent. And then sometime in his 20s, he's had a mastectomy. Now, that's a worry, but this is where I get into trouble. It's so different sitting with someone like this person and sitting with some of the others. That's what I noticed that got me worried. And so I'm happy to support him and some of my trans clients. They're just ordinary people wanting to live their lives peacefully.
So there's a lot of contention about whether there are true trans, like people, transsexuals versus these, autogynephiles. There's a lot of arguments about all that stuff. But like you, I've known people who personally, I understand that it was the right decision for them. It was a decision made as adults in their 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
And, I can't imagine some of these people in their biological, living true to their biological sex. Yeah. However, the vast majority of trans activists and people out there who are trans identifying are the AGP kind of people, or girls with homophobia, or are trying to identify out of hypersexualization. And it seems so obvious to me, but everybody who is out there and doesn't understand this phenomenon believes that all trans people are like the true trans.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And this is one of the things, like obviously in my area of sexuality, one of the areas I did a lot of work in was with paraphilias, people that wanted their nappies changed, people that wanted to be fed, people that wanted to have sex with dogs. So, and that was just ordinary for me. Like that's been part of my clinical work, because no one else really knows a lot about how to manage them. And so, and in the end, I always think nothing's going to shock me, and then I hear something else. Really? So now that I'm seeing more and more of it online, like when I'm watching some of the stuff on Twitter, I think that's paraphilia. It's not trans. And again, I was a bit doubtful about autogynephilia when I first read about it, but now I'm sort of thinking I can see where that fits in. But I think there's a lot of other types of sexual compulsivity that's coming along with this. But I also think that there are some people that are just deciding it's the in thing, maybe someone who's like the younger versions of these people, that they're in their 20s, no one they don't really have a good social group, they're possibly not attractive to the opposite sex. So this is a way of getting noticed, of being in a group. But it's how we get to the stage where you can actually say that. Like I was on Twitter this morning, I'm just totally bemused by it. And we were talking about women's spaces, and this person was saying that, there's no reason for women to fear. So I then posted a link to the Leah Thomas, or whatever her name is, over, and he just shut down and said, if you're going to quote that rubbish. So they just simply won't listen to what's happening.
Men don't listen to traumatized women at all anyway. That's why it's a men's rights movement, because they don't care about your trauma. Their paraphilia is more important than your trauma, your rape, your abuse, your domestic violence. They don't give a shit. They care about having their needs femininity, confirmed.
But the thing to understand, and this is why I'm always careful about how I talk about it, there are people within the trans community. Like I asked one of my clients about it, gently, trying not to sort of be too pushy, So this is a person, female, who's transitioned to male. So what biological sex do you have, do you think? And he said, well, I'm biological female. I just like to live as a man. So there's a lot of, this is why I don't like lumping all men into the same category, or trans people into the same category. But you get accused of lumping everybody into the same category when you start saying those sorts of things. And I don't know how. I think the problem is that it's become so polarised that voices of people like me do get drowned out, because each side can think I'm doing something wrong. But it was actually the idea of supporting these two young people to go on cross-sex hormones. They were heading towards 18, so they didn't have to go. This is when they had to go to the family law court, so they didn't have to do that. And I was concerned that at 18 it wasn't appropriate. And that's when I started asking people and saying, look, I don't know about this. There's two girls, separate cases. What should I do? And a psychiatrist said, oh, no, they'll be fine, and you can write the letter. And I did write the letter, and now I feel, and in fact, I followed that person up, and I think he's doing okay. But the whole idea of pronouns, heavens above, I barely remember people's names. How the hell am I going to remember their pronouns? And then
the police had a missing person the other night, and they used they, them pronouns.
Yes.
And it was an obvious female, but reading took there was no urgency to it.
Yes.
It's like, a missing person, and it was they did not identify this person at all as female.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what kind of crazy world are we living in? This person's at risk. Our eyes are telling, and they weren't obviously female. They weren't, hyper feminine, obviously, because they're a they, them. But I just thought, it was a frightening thing, actually.
Yes.
Gaslighting is frightening, particularly when it's from the police, who are, supposed to uphold truth and facts and will come after me if I'm, dishonest. They're lying to me.
Yes, yeah.
What sort of society allows that?
And I think this is going to be one of the issues for the task force, because I know some people that have applied to go on it. You've got so whether they get on or not, I don't know. will not use pronouns, will not, defer in any way to the trans language. And so that's going to be an issue within the group itself, that you're disrespecting me. I've got to go. I've agreed to do a paper in Brisbane in May on this mismatched libido stuff. And whereas in the past I might have been a bit more, oh, yes, I don't mind going along with it. Now I feel like I'm going to be talking about a man and a woman. They're all going to be referred in that way. I'll say that there might be other couples, but I'm going to generalise and talk about a man and a woman. Because at the conference I was at a few years ago that, I started talking about this, there was a really lovely sexual health woman, doctor she's just, some people have just got that gentle kind of demeanour about them, and when she's talking you feel really kind of like she's just talking to you. So this woman was giving her talk on painful intercourse and in women. And about halfway through, this person got up dressed in, sort of mismatch of clothing, and she said, I'm feeling very excluded. You're talking about people with vaginas as women. Well, I'm a man with a vagina. Now, this poor woman, she was totally thrown, and that's when I thought there's more to this than just trans rights. Why would you do that?
Bullying.
Why would you stand up?
It's bullying.
Yeah.
Sandra, we're going to have to wrap it up soon, but can you we'll have to get you back on, I think, for a session about autogynephilia. But can you tell us, when is the task force, how long is this process going to take with the APS?
Well, what's the applications to go on the task force closed last Friday. And I think there's going to be a very careful consideration to the makeup of that group. And the president was saying, Tamara Kavanagh was saying, that it could take anywhere from 1 to 2 years. The psychiatrist one took 2 years.
Wow.
Now, I think that's a long time, but, as I've said, I'm going to stand back. I'm happy to be in the background if there's any role that I can play there, but, I'm just tired. I just don't.
Well, I think we all are. Anyone on this side of the fence is a bit tired.
Yeah.
The hate speech legislation will be introduced before that is done, which is kind of a scary time, basically.
Yeah. Where's that being introduced? Because the ACT recently brought a decision down on someone who'd been charged with hate speech that, no, it didn't constitute hate speech. I think in 9 out of the 10 things that were quoted, there was only one that they felt qualified for hate speech. So,
yeah.
Victoria, so Woke-toria is the nickname we've gotten down here, because we've just gone crazy full steam ahead with this stuff. We've got self-ID, we've got explorative therapy, talk therapy for gender dysphoria is now criminalised, $10,000 fines. It's just unending. Yeah.
Well, I think things are changing. I've been a member of SEGM for about a few months now, and I think they're, really trying to do a lot of coordinated work to get better information out there. But I think it's going to take time. So, but in terms of autogynephilia, probably James Moriarty is much more up with that than I am.
Is he in Australia?
Yeah, he is. Yeah. So
details off you. Excellent. All right. Yeah. Thanks, Sandra.
Thank you, Sandra. You're an important voice.
Thank you. Sometimes I don't feel it, but thank you.
You are.
Well done on all the work you're doing on this. We appreciate it.
Thanks very much. It's nice to talk to you both. As you see, once I get onto it, it just rolls out.
Yeah, we love it. We love it.
Take care, okay?
Thank you. Bye.
See you later. Bye-bye. There we go. Leave meeting.
Oh, what a legend. Good.
I could talk to her all day, but really interesting. Yeah, really interesting. And of course, as a clinical psychologist, then she's able to diagnose.
Yeah.
So that's huge. Yeah, clinical psychologists can diagnose. They just can't treat with medicine. So a psychiatrist has to give you the medicine, but a clinical psychologist can diagnose you or say you haven't got it or whatever. But now, because it can be weaponized against them, they can't. So not good. Wow.
Look, that was all very enlightening. And I do know of a man in our group. He's a gay man. He's a clinical psychologist. He's worked with LGBT kids. And I know he kept getting referrals for people, for kids, young people with gender dysphoria. And in the end, he was just like, no, I'm not taking on any of these clients anymore, because he just does not agree with transitioning them. He can see that it's harming gay and lesbian kids in particular. So I know he applied for that task force. I hope he gets on it.
Yeah, hopefully, you know, gay and lesbian people will be represented.
Yep.
Yeah, that's scary times. God, when it's talking about this stuff, I have so many flashbacks to my adolescence and you know, growing up with so many gay people and working in a gay bar and you know, having, like, you know, gender non-conforming friends who are now trans, and I'm remembering back to how confusing that time was, you know, and it was also during AIDS, so we got the shit kicked out of us just for being in the street, because we, you know, like, everyone assumed my friend was, you know, my partner, and, you know, we were forced to perform, like, to kiss each other, if I was with a gay friend, to prove that he wasn't gay, otherwise he'd get his teeth punched out, you know. So just talking about all this stuff is quite triggering for me, actually, and I didn't expect it, you know. And also, you know, at times when I was questioning my own sexuality and you know, just where that fit in with my morals, and, you know, I can only imagine what it would be like to be 13 or 14 now and, you know, be confused about your sexuality. Like, it's a living nightmare. Yep. You know, and then to be chucked on the trans train. Yep. Like, it's crazy times.
That there's a gender non-conforming lesbian woman from the US who identified as a man for a number of years in her teenage years. And, you know, she said she didn't know that she could be a lesbian. She didn't know that she could look the way that she looks, gender non-conforming, and still be a woman. The lesbian examples that were given to her were trans women, non-binary, not lesbian women. And this is the message that kids are getting. It's crazy.
Yeah, I didn't know bisexual existed until I was like 40, because I always thought of it as, you know, lesbian for the male gaze. And you know, it just had such a bad name when I was growing up to be bisexual that it wasn't real, you know, which is crazy. Yeah, which is crazy. And even now, bisexuals are caught in the crossfire, because you can't be bisexual if sex doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So, you know, and they get called, oh, you must be pansexual. So, well, I'm not attracted to everyone. I'm attracted to males or females or both, and to varying degrees, you know. So it all has to be spelt out all over again, just like it did decades and decades and decades ago. Now, it's just insane. It's just completely insane. It shouldn't be this complicated, and people shouldn't be compelled to label themselves either. It's okay to just be floating along and confused, and everyone seems to be put on a pathway now, forced into a rigid role before they even know who they are. It's crazy.
There's some really funny TikToks out there.
Oh no, I can't go there. Not the what is it, the libs of TikTok or something?
Yeah. One just came to mind of this woman, like, rattling off this, like, huge list of all the labels that she had for her sexuality, her identity, her disability. It was like a minute long, or probably not that long, but it just went on and on. It was ridiculous. Yeah. Anyway.
Crazy. Well, yeah.
Well, I was just gonna. There was another news piece yesterday that we didn't touch upon earlier. We've really only got another 5 minutes, but that police one.
Oh, yes. I'm quite interested in this one. Yeah. Do you want to?
Yeah, I actually copied a few of these are the things that he said, which he's now facing disciplinary action for. So this is a Victorian police officer. I think the cops have some sort of private chat thing on their intranet or something, and I think that's where this happened. So the deputy police commissioner, I think it is, Mr. Patterson, he said Victoria Police is proud to have been recognised as a silver employer at the 2021 Australian LGBTQ+ Inclusion Awards. And this police officer responded with, yes, I agree, a great achievement. But if the public knew how much time, effort, and taxpayer dollars went into this, they would also be demanding why we didn't get a gold.
Yes.
And I've got to say, I've looked at some of the submissions to the Australian Workplace Equality Index, the one that's run by ACON. They're like 280 pages long. And it involves stuff like setting up a committee that meets once a month to talk about LGBT stuff. Like, there's a lot of employee time going towards these things.
And one thing that cops don't have is time. They don't have time. They're too busy writing up reports. They're not out solving crimes because they're too busy in their office writing up reports. They don't want to be out doing training to make sure they use the right pronouns. And this is the police force that has completely bought into this ACON bullshit that he's talking about, and who is actively, like I said before, missing person, using the wrong pronouns for a missing person, which is ridiculous. It's gaslighting. And also identifying, trans-identifying males as female and women. And they're also being incredibly vague about what sex trans officers are able to, process female criminals, or which sex officers process, trans criminals.
Yeah.
So, you don't want to have a female officer processing a self-identified woman who is a man with a penis, and things like that. Like, VicPol's being deliberately vague on this.
Yeah.
And they're being, they're just being so obviously captured. They're doing exactly what the UK police are doing, and every few months again, we support our LGBTQ members, where there's nothing about the LGB. It's all about their T and the Q.
Yeah.
And, they've fully captured this. And at the same time, Victoria has the highest rate of domestic violence it has ever had. It is a plague, or recorded domestic violence. It is a plague, and it is an epidemic. And their resources and their, inclusion is all going towards ACON, which is the equivalent of Stonewall, and it's Pride and Diversity rort.
Mm-hmm.
But this guy, he made a couple of comments, and I don't know whether he was being sarcastic or whatever about that's not very Christian. But I think what they've said there is legitimate. It's a legitimate comment, and he has every single right to raise concerns, as does every other member of society. It's just ridiculous, and good on him. And if you're watching out there, ACAB, except for you.
I'll read out the other things that he said that are a bit more questionable. So his other comment was, and I think this was in response to Wear It Purple Day or something like that. So the next time Australians are sent out to fight a war, maybe we can send out the 8,000 that marched today. Oh, sorry. They
cancelled Anzac Day, so like they're not allowed to commemorate Anzac Day at work. What else aren't they allowed to commemorate? Something else?
Well, they cancelled the Anzac celebrations because of COVID, but then they let some Pride March go ahead here in Victoria. So he's saying maybe we can send out the 8,000, Pride attendees that marched today, and try to stop the enemy by waving feathers and brightly coloured boas at them. I'm sure that will stop any invading army in its tracks. Okay, so that's a bit more questionable, but I see where he's coming from.
Yeah, and it's not offensive. It's not, career-endingly, know.
But this one was the one that the Age newspaper decided to headline and use the word unchristian in their headline. He wrote, I don't think you speak for all Victoria Police. I, for one, certainly don't support this, nor the groups that keep pushing their personal agendas. I can't see why we continue to throw taxpayer money at this sort of unchristian activity. So that's where he really got in trouble. And even when I posted in our private group about this, women were saying, you know, that he's probably a right-wing bigot, essentially.
But if anyone's been to a Pride March recently, you know, there's furries, there's a whole bunch of BDSM dudes. So maybe he was just talking, not dudes and dudettes and all sorts, but maybe he wasn't talking about LGB marches, you know, and maybe he was talking about that dodgy element that's invaded all the LGB functions. And, you know, once again, they're conflating all Christians as if they were a hive mind. Now, you know, I know LGBT Christians, like they're not a hive mind. So once again, Christianity is being demonized because it's very, very very convenient for the left-leaning newspapers to demonize Christians because our very unpopular Prime Minister is a Christian. And there's been a lot of anti-Christian sentiment. And we also know that one of the reasons that transgenderism is like a social contagion is because people are alienated from the church, and in these crazy COVID times are looking for something to identify passionately with. And that's why, you know, in some ways, transgenderism and gender ideology has taken place of the church. So if you're, you know, like a tinfoil hat person about this whole trans agenda, then this all makes sense, you know. And I'm a skeptic, but I'm thinking, hang on, you know, the left-leaning papers are demonizing Christians while, you know, being absolute and utter devotees to this ideology that has all the markers of fundamentalist Christianity, like to the point that it's a cult. Yeah. So it's like, you know, if you think it through, think deeper about this stuff. It all kind of...
Yeah. Just going back to the earlier story about the Muslim AFLW player who decided to sit out the Pride round. Now, if she were a Christian who had decided to sit out the Pride round, can you imagine how different the response would have been?
I can.
I can understand how Christian people are really sick of being demonized in the media. I think there are a lot of quite reasonable Christians out there.
I do too.
They're not all, you know, Westboro Baptists who think that the world is bad things are happening to the country because we allow homosexuality.
Well, the ones that are like the Westboro is on the other side. I've got someone at my door, so I have to go. Just before I go, I just want to show off my dinosaur badge.
Yeah.
Yay, because I'm a dinosaur hoarding rights.
Cool.
Yeah, and if there's any cops out there who want to come and talk to us about this whole pride and diversity thing, because I've heard through the grapevine that it is quite, you know, it's affecting people in the force and it's affecting their daily ability to carry out their job. You know. So yeah, it'd be good, get in touch with us, please. Even if you can appear anonymously, might be able to, you know, disguise you somehow or just have the sound on or something like that. But we'd like to talk to some cops if possible.
Yep. Okay. I'm going to put all the links to the articles we've been discussing in the description, along with a few others that we didn't get to, including today's one from Edie Wyatt in this Spectator, which was really good about erasure of women in language. I'll link them all there. And thanks everyone for watching.
Thanks, everybody.
We'll see you next week. See you, Anne.
Bye.